Hi everyone. Today we are going to be taking a look at something that over the past 5 years has really blessed my socks off, and I hope it does the same for you. I want to take this chance in this clip to talk a little bit about the difference between the linear view of the book of the Revelation versus what I kind of view as more of a multi-dimensional view of the book of the Revelation. You know, Apostle Paul wrote about the manifold wisdom of God, and the manifold wisdom of God means that it is many-sided, multifaceted, and multidimensional. And the Apostle Paul and Peter, they all understood it. They saw it from different points of view, but they also wrote of the manifold grace of God. And again, manifold meaning many-sided, multifaceted, and multidimensional. And the same is true of the book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ. And so, just to kind of summarize and to review the linear point of view, because I had mentioned this on some previous videos, when you read the book of the Revelation from a linear point of view, which means from Revelation chapter 1 straight through chapter 22, you start to notice some things. And I remember, I think I had shared on the previous video that about 5 years ago, I was kind of going through a really rough time in life, kind of depressed and down and discouraged about a lot of the crazy, sad things that we've experienced over the years in church. Got really discouraged and just started to lose some hope. And one of those days I was taking my dogs for a walk, and just out of the clear blue, in my heart, I felt the Lord say to me, "John, how would you like to understand the book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ?" And my initial response was, well, yeah, I would love to understand the book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ. You know, to me, and I'm sure to many of you, it's probably one of the most mysterious or shrouded with mystery books in the scriptures. It's kind of like, you know, the Holy Grail of Revelation, and you know, what does it really mean? So my initial response was, yeah, I would love to understand the book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ. And I was quiet, kind of meditating and sort of like, I guess you could say, trancing out, so to speak. And the next thing that I heard in my heart was, well, if you want to understand the book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ, then you're going to have to become willing to do what John did. And that's meaning the Apostle John. And I know you can't do stuff, quote unquote, to earn revelation because it's not about works. And I knew there was something a little bit more to what I felt the Lord was trying to get at. And so I basically asked in response to that, well, what did John do? And after a few moments, I heard in the still and in the quiet of my heart, take and eat the book. And when that came to me, I knew what it meant. So, and there's a couple different levels that we could talk about right there about taking and eating the book. But I just want to focus on, you know, for all intents and purposes, on the simple, plain, straightforward level. I began taking and eating the book. I started taking the book of Revelation, reading it day in and day out, day after day, week after week, month after month, and after several years of reading it from chapters 1 through chapters 20 to chapter 22, the linear point of view, I started to notice some things, and I had commented on this on some previous videos, but it was basically this, that from a linear point of view, you could break down the book of Revelation into the 7 sub-feasts that comprise the 3 major feasts of natural Israel under the Old Testament. And the basic breakdown is this, and it is chapter 1, the Apostle John hears behind him a voice as of a trumpet. And those trumpets, in this case, was taken. It was the horn that was taken from a mature, slain male lamb. And so right off in chapter 1 of Revelation, you have the slaying of the lamb. Okay, so that would be sort of like a sub-feast. Then you would transition to Revelation chapter 2 and 3, where you see the revelation of Christ that's dealing with the 7 churches. And under the Old Testament, there was a feast called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Feast of Unleavened Bread was the second sub-feast of the Feast of Passover. And what I'm basically outlining right now is the first major feast of Israel is Passover. Passover has 3 sub-feasts. You have the slaying of the lamb, which is Passover. You have the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which you see in Revelation chapters 2 and 3. During the Feast of Unleavened Bread, interestingly enough, in the Old Testament, the Jews would sweep and dust and clean their houses. And so what do you see Jesus doing in regard to the 7 churches in Revelation chapters 2 and 3? You see someone who is sweeping and cleaning and dusting their house. He is the head of the church. It is his house, and he has every right to. Interesting also is the fact that when it comes to household dust, which can accumulate in our homes quite a bit, most household dust actually comes from sloughed off old dead skin cells. And so what you see Jesus doing in Revelation 2 and 3 is sweeping and dusting and cleaning his house of any remaining traces of the former Adamic identity to which the church has begun to cling once again. And that will always be the natural result of the church becoming involved with the spirit of Moses' law. It will always resurrect the image of the beast, the image of Adam within us. And even though Adam was crucified, put to death, and buried at Calvary, and he is the beast that was and is not, that law, that spirit of Moses' law, will reproject, recreate an image in our hearts or conscience, and will portray in our mind the lie that Adam is still alive, and that somehow or another we're still joined to the law and obligated to the law that was to govern Adam. And so you see that, and we'll get into this in detail as we look at the 7 churches over time, but Jesus is sweeping house, he's cleaning house, he's dusting, he's getting all those old dead skin cells, traces of Adam out of his church. So that would be the Feast of Unleavened Bread, chapters 2 and 3. And then you shift gears to chapters 4 and 5, and you see one who is seated upon a throne. And this would coincide with the feast, the 3rd sub-feast of Passover, which is called the celebration of the sheaf of the first fruits. So there you have the 3 sub-feasts of Passover. Chapter 1, the slain lamb. Chapters 2 and 3, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Chapters 4 and 5, the sheaf of the first fruits. Then you transition to the Feast of Pentecost. And that's found in Revelation chapter 6, 7, and the first 6 verses of Revelation chapter 8. We find the 7 seals. And I don't want to get into like a long drawn out theological argument or debate here. I'm just talking about the linear view from a very general point of view to use as a kind of a springboard into the deeper things that the Revelation reveals. You have the 7 seals. Well, we know in the scriptures that we've been sealed with that Holy Spirit of promise. So when we're talking about the Feast of Pentecost, we're talking about the Feast of the Spirit. The initial Feast of Pentecost was really at Mount Sinai in the wilderness. The Feast of Pentecost was never meant to be anything other than a transitional feast. You know, when you listen to church people talk today, it's almost as if the baptism in the Spirit and speaking in tongues and the manifestations of the Spirit and the gifts of the Spirit are like the big shebang. I mean, this is what we're all after. This is the end that we're all striving to achieve. But the fact of the matter is that Pentecost was a feast that occurred at Mount Sinai in the wilderness. It was meant to be a transition feast because The wilderness was simply a pathway on the way where Israel was supposed to wind up, which is called the Promised Land. And so the Feast of Pentecost, as depicted in the book of Revelation, the linear view, is basically one feast. There's no sub-feast. It is the feast in and of itself. It's a short feast. It's a transition feast, because then from Revelation chapter 8, verse 7, on, you start to see trumpets. Well, the third major feast of natural Israel under the Old Testament was the Feast of Tabernacles, and the first sub-feast of the Feast of Tabernacles was the Feast of Trumpets. And so you transition out of Pentecost in Revelation chapter 6 and 7 and the first 6 verses of chapter 8. And then you go from Revelation chapter 8, verse 7, all the way over to roughly Revelation chapters 15 and 16. We're dealing with a feast of trumpets. Revelation chapters 15 and 16, we get into what is symbolically the Day of Atonement, and that's the second sub-feast of the Feast of Tabernacles. And that carries over all the way to Revelation chapter 21, where in Revelation chapter 21, John beholds the New Jerusalem descending out of heaven from God, and he hears this voice that says, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men." So in Revelation chapters 21 and 22, you have, in essence, the grand finale, the seventh sub-feast of all the feasts, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. So Revelation 1 through 5, you have the 3 sub-feasts of the major feast of Passover. Passover, unleavened bread, sheaf of the first fruits. Then chapters 6, 7, and the first 6 verses of chapter 8, you have the Feast of Pentecost. We're dealing with seals. Then from the 7th verse of chapter 8 all the way through chapter 22, we're talking the Feast of Tabernacles and the 3 sub-feasts, trumpets, atonement, and tabernacles. And so from a linear point of view, the book of the Revelation shows you sort of like a progression that takes place through these feasts. And really, whether you're looking at it from a linear point of view or this multi-dimensional view that I want to talk about for a few minutes yet, the whole book of the Revelation is really about the unveiling of Christ in you, the hope of glory. Apostle Paul wrote about a mystery that was kept hidden in secret from ages and from generations, but at his day, in his time, was now being made manifest to the saints, which is none other, and the purpose was that the riches of the glory of this mystery would be made known among the Gentiles in all the world, which is none other than this mystery of Christ in you being unveiled. And this is not something that's new. It's not a new thing, a new message. This is the reality of what has always been. It was in the mind of God, it was in the divine purpose of God always, that God would dwell in man. If you go back to the Garden of Eden, you don't find God building a church building. You see him forming man's body out of the dust of the earth. You see God breathing into that body the breath of life in his spirit. You see man himself being the tabernacle of God. And that, folks, is where this is all heading. That God, as our Father, would want to unveil and reveal himself in all of his fullness and glory and power, not in a church building, but in you and me. And that is the purpose behind the book of the Revelation. So that's the linear view. But I wanted to tell you, and just get into this a little bit here in the time we have remaining, that after several years of reading it that way from a linear point of view, and I got a lot out of it, I started to see a lot of the signs and the symbols and the pictures and the imagery and how it connected and how the dots started connecting, so to speak. And I have a background of reading and studying my Bible. I've been doing it since I was about 12 years old, and I guess this coming up October will be roughly about 33 years of that. But nevertheless, I know lots of people who've claimed to have read their Bible hundreds of times, but that's not always guaranteed that you have revelation knowledge. Your heart has to be open to these things, and you have to approach it really from an objective point of view where um, you don't go into it with any preconceived ideas. And that's very hard for some people to do, to open the Bible and read it with a non-judgmental or critical point of view, and also not to read it with a predisposed mindset of the fact that you're just reading it to justify or verify some point of view you already hold. That gets a lot of people into trouble and has caused a lot of the mess that you see today. But after several years of reading this thing from a linear point of view, it got to a point where, like an athlete, it was like you reach a certain peak, P-E-A-K, a peak, you kind of peak. You reach a certain level of performance, or you kind of plateau, as they say, or you kind of like run into this invisible wall. And I started not to get a lot out of it. And there were certain days as I continued to read it, and take and eat the book, where it's like just everything kind of, I sort of dried up and just came to a stalemate. And so I got frustrated for several days, and I was sitting in the single chair in my living room one day, and I was just kind of frustrated, and I knew I was missing something. I knew it had to be simple, because that's where God really catches us, is in the simplicity of this stuff. We have a tendency as human beings to overcomplicate everything. And so I was just kind of got to the point where I was frustrated, so I closed my Bible, I put my head back, I closed my eyes, I rested, and I prayed, what am I missing? There's something I'm just not seeing. And because everything that I was reading in certain areas was starting to contradict and not be clear and cohesive. It just wasn't going together. There was something out of sync. And so as I had my head back and I was just resting and I had my eyes closed, once again, this unction came to me in my heart and basically said, John, if you really want to glean what is hidden beneath the surface in the book of the Revelation, then just know that from this point forward, you're reading it wrong. And I thought, I'm reading it wrong. I'm reading it from chapters 1 through chapters 22. I'm reading the book of the Revelation. How can I be reading it wrong? And I was quiet for a little bit. When you get lost, you ask directions, or at least you should. Save you a lot of time, effort, and aggravation. And so I closed my eyes again, put my head back. And again, this unction came into my heart. Connect all of the ones, all of the twos, all of the threes, all of the fours, all of the fives, all of the sixes, and all of the sevens. And if you'll do that, you will see, you will notice that there is a theme to each one of those segments. And I thought, I never thought of that before. And so as I had studied the book, read the book, meditated, taken and eaten the book over a couple years, I am sort of a numbers guy. I was really good in math in school. I loved algebra, trigonometry, calculus. When I was in college for a year, I was actually a physics major. So when I was reading through the book of the Revelation, I made notes where I would find numbers, because something in me knew that this was all connected, but I just didn't see how. And so what I started doing as I read through the book of Revelation, I started reading it differently. I didn't read it anymore from chapters 1 through chapters 22. I read it almost out of order. I read it with the ones, the twos, the threes, and so ons in order until, like, for instance, I would connect all the ones and I would read only the ones. Then I'd go to the twos, and I'd only read the twos all the way to the end, and then the threes, and so on and so forth. And what I found out was that this was the missing link or key that unlocked the whole thing, and that there was something greater than a linear view. There was a multi-dimensional view, almost as if you would go to a 3D movie, but you wouldn't have the special glasses on, and you'd be trying to see what's there, and there's people around you who are wearing the glasses, and they're like, oh wow, or whoa, that was close, or whoa, did you see that, or that thing almost hit me, and you're just kind of sitting there like a bump on a log, like, I don't get it. Why are they ducking? Why are they moving? What's coming at them? And then all of a sudden, you put on the special glasses and everything becomes vivid and comes alive and at you. And so next time, we are going to talk specifically about these 7 different divisions. We're going to start getting into the different elements that are in each of these 7 different divisions. And hopefully, my prayer is that this will supply you with the multidimensional or 3D glasses that you need, just as much as I had needed them. And it will make this thing pop and come alive. And you will see a picture of Christ in you that you would have never dreamed or imagined. And it is glorious. So look forward to seeing you next time. And remember to check out our website regularly, www.todaysvoice.org. You can download audio messages or order the CDs from our public meetings of the book of Revelation, which we are teaching on constantly. We've been teaching on it every week for the past 3+ years. Also, you'll be able to find information there about home groups that we have. I believe in the church. I believe in gathering together. I should say I don't believe in necessarily going to church as much as I believe in the saints gathering together regularly for fellowship to feed off of the Christ in one another. It is totally edifying. It is awesome. And so it's when we gather together and let the iron sharpen the iron, we become so much more aware of the bigger picture. And it's just wonderful to be in fellowship with people who are like-minded, moving in the same direction, and in love with Jesus. So check out the website, www.todaysvoice.org. You can also sign up to be on our email list to receive our basically almost daily Today's Voice emails where I touch on some of this stuff. And if you're ever in Reading, stop by the Inn at Reading, 1040 North Park Road in Wyomissing. We have public meetings there every Sunday morning at 10. Very casual, very laid back. And you're free to ask questions. You're free to get in discussions. It's just a great time together. And so hopefully, maybe someday we'll see you soon. But hey, until next time, love you guys. Have a great rest of your day, and God bless you. Bye-bye.